Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sales Leverage Pip to President's Club podcast. My name is Ryan Johns, founder and CEO of Sales Leverage. We started this podcast with the intent of re-educating the market on the most optimal ways to achieve sales and revenue success. Our guests consist of revenue leaders and individual contributors across sales, marketing, business development, customer success, and even product engineering. All of these teams play a critical role in the overall success of the modern revenue org. We address the most pressing challenges and offer actionable solutions that simplify the complex revenue process. So back for a second round of discussion. Our last session was amazing. It was epic. So we had to come back, bring her back again. So I have with me today, Dr. Margie Olesen. Margie Olesen is an executive coach and team development expert with a doctorate in organizational development. She delivers her coaching with a practical strategy and actions for leaders and their leadership teams to build the right foundation for teamwork and productivity. Margie is known for quickly sizing up situation and team dynamics and providing no-nonsense direct feedback for the fastest, most effective ways to create sustainable change. She has helped leaders across multiple industries at companies like Target, Cargill, Ameriprise Financial, Ecolab, Lockheed Martin, UCare, St. Jude Medical, American Family Insurance, and many, many more. With an emphasis on the people in the organization, Margie works with senior leaders and leadership teams to become cohesive, high-performing teams, which translates into high performance across the entire business. One thing that I really appreciate about you, Margie, and I just want to kind of kick this off, is that we don't do this for show. We don't do this for views. And that's why it was really important for me to bring you back today, because I just think this is such an important topic of discussion, the people behind the business. So before we even jump in, I want to thank you so much for carving up some more time for the audience today.
Glad to be here.
Awesome. So in our last discussion, we talked about taking a people first approach to sales and revenue performance, right? One of the most critical people in business success, I always say, are leaders, right? Before we get into that, I want to kind of lay a foundation, contextual foundation around revenue operations, since that's what we're focused on. So within the revenue ops ecosystem, it typically consists of sales, marketing, business development, customer success. You've got sales operations and even product engineering, right? But again, just like we talked about last time, these functions are very, very siloed, and thus they're underperforming. Like, they're siloed even if they're in the same building, right? They're still very siloed, right?
Correct.
In order to reverse this trend, I just believe that leaders must become bridge builders, right? To remove those silos, right? And the dysfunction. And I always say leaders are the cornerstones of success in any organization. Look, I just want to get your take on that, Margie, since you work with so many leaders and so many companies. Like, what's your take on the importance of leadership?
Well, somehow we kind of lost sight of how important leaders are. They're a network of people that represent the entire organization. It's much more efficient to focus on what they need and to have them be able to influence the system that they're in. And that's the way that it works best. And we instead have set up silos and put up walls and set artificial boundaries that really actually don't make sense. But they're there because leaders higher up are allowing them. So you just named several different parts of the sales organization. So think of that as each one of them is its own ecosystem. And then it's a part of the sales ecosystem. And then sales is a part of that company's ecosystem. It sounds pretty complicated when we say it that way. And it is if you're not growing leaders who know how to do systems. If you're not growing leaders who know how to lead. And when you talk about building a bridge across to remove silos, I actually think leaders have even more of a responsibility to not just build a bridge, but to be on the same team.
Yeah.
So if we take those 6 different departments and we put them inside of the sales organization, and then that sales organization inside of the company, let's take the mid-level managers. Each of the managers has a responsibility for their part of the ecosystem, and then getting their boat, the boats of the people in their organization, to row in the direction of the leader of their ecosystem. And then that leader has a responsibility to row in the direction of the sales leader, and then that leader has the responsibility to row in the direction of the across the company. So the leaders at the top need to be in sync. They need to be their first people. They're each other's peeps, not necessarily their teams. First, they put their oxygen masks on. So they are the leaders that set the tone. And the senior leader, the senior most leader, if you're in a division or if you're in a company, they're the ones setting what the direction is. And so if you've got leaders in some of those systems who don't agree or who are better at something else, you're heading in a direction that's not their forte, or that's not what their experience has been, or they actually don't even agree with you. They don't think it's what's right for the market. They don't think it's what's right for your product or your service. So then they're going off in this direction. Pretty soon, multiply that over and over again, and you have built up silos, walls, and people are thinking of the other leader when really it's a group of leaders up here. And then as they go down to the teams that they lead, then this is a group of leaders, and then it goes down from there. And when you want to build yourself as a leader, the first thing you need is to understand your piece in that broader system. And right there, what I just described is something that is eluding people.
Yeah.
Or they're not accurate. You're at a barbecue with them and they're telling you what their role is, and they're telling you who their team is, and they're talking about how that adds value and helps the sales organization achieve its goals, and then the sales organization, how they achieve the goals of the company. But if they're not checking it with their peers and their leaders, and then their leaders checking with their leaders, what I find with clients over and over again is they're not telling the same story.
Yeah.
And they actually got it wrong. Their part in the developing of those goals is actually different than what they were saying. So now they've got their team working and rowing in a certain direction, and it's not even the right one. And that creates so many problems. And then the other thing I will say is when you have these silos, these natural developing silos, because leaders are not leading effectively, then you want to look at, well, what are your incentives? And how are you communicating? And who gets the energy and the attention for the things that they're doing? And I promise you, when you have silos all over the place, your incentives fit having silos. Your conversations are not breaking down silos. Your leaders are operating separately. And you usually have people on your teams and leaders leading some of the teams who know this, and they wish it was different, and they don't have a place to do anything about that. They don't have power. They're just kind of going along. And pretty soon, so many people are going along that you do not have the culture that you want, and you have silos all over the place.
What do you, because I don't want to call it a debate, but I've had this discussion, and I firmly believe that there's a big difference between a manager and a leader. I've seen managers do a good job measuring systems and metrics and tasks and things like that, but they don't connect with the people. Everything they do is very cookie cutter. It's nothing like specialized and custom. And I feel like being a great leader or a great coach, you have to meet your team where they are, right? You can't force a square peg into a round hole. So what's your take on the difference between a manager and a leader, if there is any?
Well, obviously the verbs are very different. So managing is not, it doesn't even sound like it's inspiring. It doesn't sound like it's creative. It sounds like it's taking what's already there and sort of keeping it maintained,
The
contained.
status quo. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And when most of us ended up working remotely, the leadership that really was needed, just like before, the engagement because of remote became much more transactional. And management is managing transactions. You
Right.
can manage people, but you're managing them like they are objects or machines. we bring our whole selves to the company, even leaders who aren't comfortable talking about that. They're not comfortable talking about feelings. They're not comfortable talking about vulnerabilities, their own or somebody else's. But the truth is, we all bring our whole selves, regardless of whether or not that is being tapped. And so a manager, like if you're familiar with Risk, the board game, moving pieces around on the board. A leader, and we can get into the attributes of a leader, but one of the most important roles of a leader is to develop all the people that relate and report into them as their part of the network. So we're not going to take 1,000 people in a company and work with everybody every single day to make things improve.
Yeah.
But we're going to look at the network of leadership, and we're going to work with those leaders to initiate a change or to update something or to get some input on something. We're going to have a much more efficient way because we have this network of leaders. Each of those leaders represents the team that report to them, and each of those team members is a whole person. So the most important strategic gain you can get from a leader when you're a company is who are they developing and how are they leading them? Which does include management, by the way. So if we're thinking about the best way to show up as a leader to a direct report, let's just start there. The number one thing is that the direct report knows what the role of the team is to achieve the leadership goals. So if you're in some sort of an operational role and your team is an operational team and you report up into sales and sales reports up into the leader of the company, then I, as a direct report, am aware of what my leader's role is, what the team is supposed to accomplish for those bigger goals at the ops level, at the sales level, and at the company level. So I know what all of that is, and I don't just know it once. I know it. I keep knowing it because that's how we work. You as my leader are keeping me highly informed. And it's a two-way communication. So number one, I know what our team's role is. Number two, I know what my role is on the team. Number three, I have what I need to deliver. And number four, I know what my leader thinks about how I'm doing. So those four pieces, and in there is some management, because in there is some ways of looking at how the work's getting done and the goals and the metrics for succeeding, your aspirational, your actual. No, we have to hit these targets. And this is where we're at in the process. And me, the direct report, I'm a cog in that process. I am continuously updated by my leader around how they think I'm doing. And it is okay for me to ask for things. So if I'm asking for something and my leader it doesn't even appreciate that I need that to be successful, then that leader is being they're more of managing, trying to manage a situation rather than leading. Those leaders among all those teams roll up to leaders who roll up to leaders. That leadership is going in the same direction. It is ensuring that people are clear and aligned. It is making sure they have what they need and they're rowing in that same direction and they know how we think they're doing. So the performance management of yesterday, those are managers delivering those performance conversations. Leaders have a much more broad view of what is needed. And I would also add that a manager could almost get away with not having authentic conversations about feelings or behaviors. Leadership recognizes the whole self, including their own, recognize the whole self, and they deal with the whole self in leading the company. There are people who sign up for being a manager. That is what fits their personality, and that for wherever they're at in life, that's what they want to do. For everybody else, when we lead, we want to inspire, we want to model, we want to take responsibility for how they feel when they go back to their other life. We do not think of them as an object or a piece of furniture. We see their whole selves. We're not responsible for making them happy. We're not caretakers here. We are having boundaries, and we are being respectful, and we are giving them what they need and being really clear about what they should be doing, and then we are holding them accountable is one of the best leadership roles. And it's not a negative. It's
Yeah.
only a negative when you're not set up for all that clarity I just mentioned. If I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, I don't understand how my team fits in the sales organization, and I don't understand how the sales organization fits into the company, then how would I even know where I'm going or how I'm doing? So performance management is not going to help me. I am a much more productive, higher morale, more engaged individual when I have that information. I don't need you to make me feel good. I need you to help me feel clear.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. I had another question I wanted to ask you, but then you triggered something when you said accountability. So I don't know if you got a chance to look at some of the material I had sent over. There was a concept called that I would call mutual accountability. One of the companies that I worked for, actually the first leadership role that I was in, it was a software company, and they had a really good model. I like it was the VSG model, the vision, strategy, goal, metrics, or something like that. But it was a good model to ensure that each line of business there was cohesion, there was clear communication, unified language, all of that. That was really, really good. We understood how we fit into the grand scheme of the overall business. Mutual accountability was something that I wrote about in a book, and I created this kind of leadership assessment because as leaders, yeah, we're always telling our employees what we expect of them and what the goals are, and we're doing performance reviews and things like that. But what I would do is I would allow my team to evaluate my leadership value, my leadership ability to them specifically, right? They can't really speak to how I'm leading the organization all that well, but they can definitely let me know how I'm serving them as a leader. Am I providing you the support? Am I being empathetic? Am I spending the necessary time to develop you? Do I understand what your goals are? Right. Because again, I always say people, the fundamental needs of a human are safety and belonging. So where do they belong? Where do they fit? And so I would allow them and I had to exercise some emotional fortitude to hear some of the feedback, some of the areas that may have been blind spots for me, but it made our team much, much stronger and our performance went through the roof because they knew I was going to do whatever I committed to, I was going to do for them. I was going to deliver, come hell or high water. And I think that went a long way with that team. And I don't know if a lot of leaders do that. At least the ones I've talked to have never done that before. They've never practiced that mutual accountability model where they allow the team to really give them a formal review as a leader too.
And so, if we start a list of ways to grow your self awareness, because self awareness is one of your greatest strengths as to
Yeah.
be an effective leader, one of the items we'll add to the list is that you go through an experience like what you're talking about, but
Hmm.
you help it feel somewhat natural. It doesn't feel like
Yeah.
an all or nothing conversation, or
Yeah.
initially it can feel awkward. It can feel like critical conversations that are maybe uncomfortable. Part of the uncomfortable aspects are just the lack of familiarity. When it becomes less new, when you developed a pathway for having those kinds of conversations, they start to feel more natural and they start to feel more strategic. They're less all or nothing. And
Yeah.
you yourself, as a leader, you're growing your self awareness. With
Yeah.
and you didn't even have that goal necessarily.
Hmm.
I one time working for a financial services company had the opposite experience. So we implemented 360 and we did it for teams of a certain size. We're going to evaluate their leaders. And I knew that that was scary territory because I had been on the team for probably 8 months and they hadn't put the building blocks in place to have open communication. You don't
Yeah.
start there unless you
Yeah.
want to have landmines around you. And so made it a point in my assessment, which was anonymous, I made it a point in my assessment to say only things that were constructively positive, and I didn't say one negative thing about the leader. And after we finished, the whole company did this, and then we started having one on ones. In our next one on one with our leaders, they talked about the assessment and they connected with their people, and then we talked about it as a team. And in my one on one, my leader said, I know which things you complained about me.
Oh my
And
God.
of course, even if
Yeah.
they were correct, which they weren't because I didn't say anything negative,
Yeah.
even if they were correct, where's that headed? I mean,
Yeah.
we were in person. I'm in an office with the door closed. I am
Yeah.
not comfortable with this energy.
Yeah.
Then we went into so after everyone's one-on-ones, we went into a team conversation to the under the guise of the leader said, I really want this to help my development. But then the way they led the meeting was to call us out for things that we shouldn't have said. And all of that was the opposite of an aware individual.
Yeah.
That was more management, as if we were concrete objects. We were something to transact with. And we were on, let's say we're on a factory line, and when they thought I said something negative, actually what they were doing was incorrect. So they would have been a reject on the factory line. They had an error. They had a leadership error.
Yeah.
So what I recommend to leaders, and mutual accountability is I think of that as a phase. And so I launched Top Team Accelerator because I wanted leaders to just focus on the critical few. It's really hard when you're out there and things are really busy and there's so much going on and there's so many different departments and so many different teams, and you've got these silos and they don't feel like they're helpful and they're not. So I wanted leaders to do in order of what you need for foundational, but not too much. And do the things that you need to do, but not too much, so that you can get this thing, literally turn your ship around, even though you're up and running and you're busy every day. And mutual accountability would be a phase after the initial work. And even accountability isn't first. Accountability comes weeks down the road when you have built the team's awareness of each other. Who's on the team?
Gotcha.
So let's say that we are a leadership team that reports into the head of sales. So we represent the leaders of the different ops organizations. We report into sales. So we start with, what are each of our teams working on? How does that fit in with the goals of the sales organization? What do people bring a value to the table, so that we're not furniture, we're not objects? Oh, that's a person. I've been working with them for a long time, but now I didn't know that they went to college and got this degree, or I didn't know that they're also interested in science or whatever it is. And also, I didn't know they got Employee of the Year 3 years ago when they were at a different company. That's very interesting. And it might sound silly what I'm saying. Why do I have to know about the people on my team? I'll tell you why. Because when you don't know them or think of them as human, you do treat them in ways that are more transactional.
Yeah.
So we want the humanness, because that's where your creativity and talent is. So when you can maximize the humanness of the people on your team, you're going to get a lot more success, way more revenue, way more metrics met, way more schedules. All of that is better because they get to tap on more. So we start with recognizing who's there, and then we start the process of being really clear, so that people share clarity, not just everybody's looking at the same bullet points. Okay, we all got it. No. Do we have it? How do you recite it to your team? How do they recite it to their team? What is your team saying back to you? And are we aligned on the decisions that were made, on the schedule, on the what's first? And then where we have challenges and where we're working on it, and where we have behavioral challenges, gossip, complaining, politics, being in meetings and never saying a word. That's an interesting behavior. So we're going to start talking about those openly so that we can move things along much faster. At that point, the leader gets to begin to talk about holding people accountable. It's not fair to go after holding people accountable when they don't have clarity. It's not fair to hold people accountable if they don't have what they need to do the work. It's not fair to hold people accountable if they're always off by themselves and they don't even really know you. They really don't know what you're thinking or what you need or how you think their work is. How is it fair that you're holding them accountable? But rather than day one start to hold people accountable, day one we start with putting the building blocks in place.
Right.
And then that starts to gain traction. It starts to change some of the habits of not being held accountable, some of the habits of having conversations that are awkward. They start to feel awkward, but eventually they're less awkward. Eventually they become normalized. And at the point that you start to normalize with your team members what's really happening, what the situation is on the ground, what's working well and what is needed, and making sure that we're rowing in the direction of the leader, what happens is those team members start to hold each other accountable.
Mm.
Now you really do have mutual accountability. And for, let's take the C-suite executive and their leadership team, or the CEO and their leadership team. You want to get to pretty quickly the kind of clarity and alignment where we are holding each other accountable, not going back to our teams and gossiping, not going back and saying, we're going off in this different direction. Those people are crazy. They do not understand the market. Let's just do this thing over here and we'll keep our heads down. That is not accountability. That's not mutual accountability. And that's not where your success metrics are. The thing
Yeah.
I think that is most interesting for holding each other accountable, holding myself accountable, my leader holding me accountable, is it happens or it doesn't. It's like it might happen. We're leaving that risk. We're leaving open to the risk. However, when we're doing our financials, we're never going to make those kinds of mistakes when we're doing our taxes or we're sending out invoices. We
Yeah.
get that there's an art and science to that, and we know what the pieces are that have to be in place that we have to be good at. But we've got silos and we don't realize that's a problem. We're not holding each other
Mm.
accountable. We don't realize that's a problem. And we're kind of making it up as we go along. When you get serious about growing yourself as a leader and being a leader with peers and leading
Mhm.
your teams, it starts to become much more intentional, much more strategic, and much more natural.
Do you believe that leadership, do you believe that everyone has leadership in them innately, or is it a choice
I
that
do
someone makes
believe
to say, I want to be a leader?
so. If we go back to the beginning of humans, we
Hmm.
are social. So we know we're hardwired to
Hmm.
be social. So we do
Yeah.
have the capacity to be in groups and make it work. As a matter of
Hmm.
fact, that's how we survive. So if we start there, even if you're someone who prefers to spend a lot of time on your own, we have found data wise that if you look at all the different styles, profiles, whatever is your favorite assessment, Myers-Briggs, Strength Finders, DISC, whatever is your favorite way of thinking about, am I an introvert, am I an extrovert, we don't find that there are clearly huge advantages to one type of
Hmm.
profile over another.
Hmm.
So we start out with brain capacity to be able to be a part of a social group. And then everything that happens after that involves humans who are already born, who have already learned probably not the best way to lead. So if your leader has come through all of this and has a lot of self-awareness, and they have had worked for leaders who know how to put those building blocks in place that I just said, you have a much greater chance of learning that from them.
Hmm.
Conversely, if your leaders have been toxic, if you grew up in a household where leadership was a challenge, those are your first leaders.
Yeah.
When you get on a sports team, or you start to do music in a group, you get your first jobs, you start out in your career, those leaders are teaching you leadership. So whatever might have been innate, whatever might have been natural, it's all turning into adding to my brain and giving me the what you say is the thing to focus on, and then I'm developing habits around that. I, as a person, didn't even get a chance to reject or accept. Oh, you're a good leader, I'm going to learn from you. Oh, you're not the best leader, I'm not going to
Hmm.
learn from you. It doesn't work that way. And
Yeah.
so when we're intentional, then everyone has the chance to be a much better leader. And I will say, this idea of a leader in every chair, I would say great someday. I'm not even sure where you're going with that, if you're trying to
Hmm.
cop out and not take responsibility for the things that are under your watch, but the leadership is at the top and it flows down from there. Whatever they do, how they lead is going to teach the people under them how to lead. And however they lead is going to flow down. So their biases, their failings, their shortcomings, you're making that the culture because you're leading it. That's the culture you have. You don't just come along and find culture. It doesn't work
Hmm.
that way.
Right.
So there are some people who have a healthier orientation to life for a variety of reasons. They are a
Hmm.
much more natural, healthy leader. Now, some people, if you don't know how important it is to have a healthy orientation as a leader, then you're just not going to agree with me, and that's fine. You can feel like everybody has to be top down, and I'm going to tell you what to do, and I'm going to
Yeah.
check it off the box as it goes. That's going to be very transactional. You're going to muscle through on your projects and your deadlines and your go-to-market strategies, and you're going to make it happen through a lot of firefighting and a lot of crisis management.
Yeah.
But if
Yeah.
you really want to develop leaders and develop individual contributors and break down those silos and create alignment that helps you go farther faster, so you can fail faster and you can try some things faster and you can meet and exceed the goals that you set, but you haven't been doing. If you want that, you need to do the short list of the things that make you an effective leader, even if it's not your natural ability or if you've had some challenges along the way. I like to use the example of the way we go to therapy. So one type of therapist does more psychoanalysis, more root cause. So I'm going to go to therapy and I'm going to spend some time thinking about my past and how did I get here? What might be contributing to the habits that I have for how I talk and how I react and how I lead? Someone might go to a behaviorist therapist who let's just start with today and let's put some systems and processes in place and behave our way to a change.
Mm-hmm.
And then as we do that, we'll check for the stubborn challenges and then we'll do some root cause. We'll do some psychoanalysis on those. But let's just start here. And so what I find working with clients who say, well, I'm just not a natural leader, or they don't say it, but they're secretly thinking it. They're so glad they finally got promoted, but they really are not sure how they're supposed to be able to do this. They were supposed to bring everything they need to be an effective leader. No. Let's grow them. So
Yeah.
when I start working with them, some things take off right away. Fixing their meetings, done. Setting
Yeah.
up a governance structure, done. Learning how to make good decisions. What's the decision science? What's the art and science around leadership in general? Some of those things start to fall into place and they're pretty excited. They're kind of a little weirded out that it's been possible for them and they haven't been able to go here. How did I miss out on this news?
Mm-hmm.
Some pieces won't turn right away. And that's why you hadn't changed them up to now. They're going to
Yeah.
take a little bit more attention. They may take more than just what you can do at work to fix some things. Maybe you've got some habits that are really getting in the way of your success. Maybe you have not all the right people on the bus. And so we meet you where you are, but every person, if they want to, can follow the best practices, the principles of leadership. And when they do, they're not just growing as a person, they're creating an operations organization that is hitting its metrics and exceeding them.
Mm-hmm.
Not because they did different work around the actual operations necessarily, but when you start improving these people metrics, all those other things get so much
Yeah.
better.
Yeah. One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is like in revenue ops, and especially with all the changes that have taken place in the last few years, I think people have kind of stumbled into leadership. And what I see a lot of is uh, executives and senior leaders think, well, this individual was a good individual contributor. That's going to translate to being a good leader because they
Correct.
performed, right? They had good performance, they had good numbers, but I've seen it not translate. So, what are some things that people should be looking at beyond just the numbers to determine
Mm-hmm.
if I got this leadership spectrum? On one end, it's a pretty bad leader, and on the other end, it's great leader. I'm a great leader.
Mm-hmm.
How do they determine where they fall on that spectrum outside of just the performance piece? Because that's big in our world. Like we're all numbers driven, but it's bigger than that.
So those leaders above who promoted this person because they were great as an individual contributor, they're not being honest with themselves if they say, well, I didn't know that meant they wouldn't be a good leader. I thought individual contributor, of course they're going to be a leader. Now, they know better because they themselves have gone through that. So
Mm-hmm.
they get to where they're at in their life and in their work, and they're secretly wishing they knew some things about how to be an even better leader. But their
Mm-hmm.
path to get there was great sales
Mm-hmm.
or great ops, not great leadership necessarily.
Yeah, yeah,
So, what I recommend to leaders, first of all, the individual contributor moving into a leadership role, this is why I like to meet leaders right where they are. So, you can be anywhere on the spectrum And unless you try some things and it doesn't work, then you're going to be able to grow your
Hmm.
leadership. There are certain things that you need to have in place, and one of them is self awareness. And we can talk about how you go after that. Another is you have to have all the clarity and the alignment that I described with your peers and the leaders above. So if
Hmm.
you don't have that, you're going to bring that baggage and those
Hmm.
gaps to leading your own team.
Yeah.
And then the third thing is, and you can go out to topteamaccelerator.com and take my team assessment. That team assessment, it's free. You don't even have to give your email. You can just go through it. It's really fast. And when you read the statements to give your 1, 2, or 3 about whether it's true for you, those statements tell you that's a roadmap
Hmm.
for how to set up. That's a roadmap for what you need to be an effective leader. And then when I'm working with teams and leaders, we always do some other assessments.
Hmm.
So we do DISC. We
Yep.
do this team assessment, and I love Working Genius. Would love to talk about Working Genius. And
Yep.
then, and embedded in those assessments and embedded in those processes are the answers to the question, where should I focus so I can be an effective leader?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you could sit around all day and worry, well, I probably should be more strategic. How do I do that? Or I think I'm supposed to have more of a poker face. Or I'm supposed to listen twice as often as I talk, whatever.
Yeah.
Actually, you put the building blocks in place for that clarity and that alignment, and you practice at setting goals around behaviors. So you say, we're going to reduce gossip, we're going to reduce complaining, we're going to work together to solve problems instead of going back to our teams and talking about it back there and having the same problems over and over again. We're going to do some assessments. We're going to talk openly about what the assessments say.
Hmm.
So when I lead a team and we do an assessment, one of the first thing I do is talk about my own results.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
here's what I resonated with. Here's what I agree with on this assessment. I do have challenges in these areas. Would love
Yeah.
your help.
Yeah.
Or I have a challenge in this area. And by the way, you might not have known this, but I have a 12-step meeting I just started going to. Or I've been wanting to connect with more of my peers to learn how they lead well. So I'm going on a mastermind 7-day intensive, and we're going to go on this vacation thing in my
Hmm.
personal life, and I'm going to grow more as a leader while I'm there. I didn't
Yeah.
have to lay out my dirty laundry and have to talk about my feelings all day,
Yeah.
but I'm 1 step, 2 steps, 3 step closer to being more effective and having more self-awareness.
Right.
The other thing that I would say is, so now we're talking about the internal and where does a leader fit on a spectrum and what are the kinds of behaviors and strengths and skills do they need to have in order to be effective. You can do that all day long. But if, as a leader, you're setting up or you inherited an organization that's not sound, it's not developed well, now
Hmm.
you are going to just fight fires all day long.
Absolutely.
So, and
Yeah.
you can have when I work with clients, they can have their process, organization, operations choice. They
Yeah.
can do their favorite thing. But what I always am looking for is, what's your documentation for how you have clearly told the story of your
Yeah.
organization? So
Yeah.
let's say you're an operations arm. So imagine I'm looking at an Excel spreadsheet and I've got these rows that are the big things that we do. What are the four
Yeah.
things we do on my team in my part of the organization? What are those four things?
Hmm.
Within each of those four, what are the sub things? What are the
Hmm.
3 things that make up this one and the 5 things that make up this one? And then for each one of those, now we're up to 20 or 24, what are the actual processes that get us to each of those capabilities, each of those functions? And as I say this, it might sound like, oh, she just got really bureaucratic. She just got geeky. We've done that and it just sits on the shelf. Nobody ever looks at it. We paid a consultant for all of that. I think of it as one way to show who you are and how you're set up. And it is
Hmm.
much harder to be aligned if you're not all looking at the same thing. And it's much
Absolutely.
harder and longer to change something if you're always having to tell the story over and over and you don't have documentation and you don't have
Yeah.
agreement. So I
That's
think
one.
of this.
I got to say this, Marty. Like, this is why organizations need someone like you to oversee some of this because I have seen organizations try to do this on their own. What is it? The EOS. It was the book
Yeah,
Traction, where they
iOS.
talk about rocks.
Yeah, Data
iOS.
Liquid.
Yeah, people. I've seen companies try to execute that and they butcher it. They don't connect the dots, the micro to the macro. Like they still stay in the weeds so much. Like they'll go through the motions, but there's not that constant alignment between, again, the operational task and the big picture organizational layers of things. Like, how does
And
that
why
map to the
don't they
big?
connect the dots? They don't connect the dots because they got promoted because they're really good at closing a sale.
Yeah, yeah,
They
yeah,
don't
yeah,
connect the dots because they started in IT and they understand the whole system and they got promoted into
yeah,
this role because they're so well versed.
yeah,
So, but somewhere on your team, someone knows how to do that.
yeah,
Somewhere on your team, if you look far enough, are
yeah,
people who are dot connectors.
yeah.
They get the micro and the macro. They love iOS. So when I come in and work with a client, that we can do their process organization of choice. And
Mm,
what I'm doing when I'm there is trying to correct the mistake that consultants have made for decades, which is I'm going to come in, you're going to pay me, I'm going to leave, nothing changed. And that thing that we did, that 500 slide deck that we created,
hmm.
when it was printed, we use it as a doorstop. When it's
Yes.
virtual, it just gets moved to new systems. Every time we have a
Yep.
new system, we just keep moving it. Nobody's using it. That
Yes.
to me is malpractice. I don't like to work
Yes.
that way. I will always be empowering you and educating you on doing it yourself. And
Yeah.
so, just so people are not missing the point, why is it important to have documented what your processes are? Because for each one of those processes, someone has a job to do around that. Well, there's
Hmm.
role clarity right there. And
Yeah.
also, someone's a leader and they're making decisions. And one of the many ways that organizations get mired in a lot of noise is they don't even agree on who's making which decisions. So
Yeah.
I'll come to an unproductive meeting. So you haven't been able to fix your meetings because you're so mired, and
Hmm.
people come into that meeting and they spend 20 minutes talking about something that was never going to be their decision in the first place. And so you lay out your organization. What are the big things? What are the
Yeah.
processes? And guess what? When you say what your processes are, by extension, there's nothing on here for what you're not supposed to be doing. You
Yeah.
shouldn't be doing processes that aren't on here.
Yeah.
And then you create documentation. What call them whatever you will. And then when new people come on board, you have documentation for who you are.
Hmm.
And when you're not sure if you're aligned, or when you want to start connecting dots and you want to make sure that there is clarity and alignment, you will use this kind of information and you will check for understanding and check. And you'll pull it out at every meeting to have the conversation about this one process that is we're still hung up here. We still have a bottleneck here. Now,
Yeah.
again, you can use lean, you can use whatever you want to remove
Hmm.
bottlenecks. But what I see is that people they've become friends with the bottleneck. It's something they
Yes.
talk about in meeting after meeting. And when they're doing that, they're missing all those other conversations that they're not having that will help them win and help them be the
Hmm.
company they want to be. And when you fix your meetings, part of what you're doing is making sure that you've documented that you know who you are and what you're supposed to be doing. And then it doesn't sit on a shelf or in your files. It comes up over and over and over. This is who you are. This is just another way to show and tell the story of who you are so we can be in continuous alignment, which is one of our greatest strengths.
To stay in that type of alignment and to keep this behavioral discipline going, does it go against the natural tendencies of the brain? Like, I feel like people just want to be safe. People just want to be comfortable. People don't want to, they don't want to know what's broken. You know what I mean?
Where
Like they
where
they
you
don't feel
want to
safe
get
knowing
to,
that.
where you want to get to is safety. You feel safe when you're identifying problems. You
Hmm.
feel safe when you're admitting that you don't know. You
That's
feel
where you want
safe.
to get
It's
to,
okay.
right?
It's
Yeah,
okay. But you don't get there on day one. So you
yeah,
put those same it's kind of an order of operations. You don't
yeah,
start here. This is trust. Nope, you start here.
yeah.
Trust comes out of an organization that's documented,
Hmm.
alignment and clarity. Trust comes from there. So the
Yeah.
brain is dealing with the most familiar. So that is its
Yes.
safety zone.
Yeah.
So you have to shake it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so then when we do it in that order of operations, the first thing we do is just start introducing it to new things,
Yeah.
better ways, better meetings. I'm going to treat this person not transactionally, but more like a person. And then the
Yeah.
brain, when you develop those habits, it comes along.
Yeah.
So now it
Yeah.
doesn't feel unsafe to have a real conversation. It doesn't feel unsafe if my leader teaches me that it's okay for me to ask for help. I will feel
Hmm.
safe doing that. Not the first
Hmm.
time, but maybe the eighth or the ninth time. If our team is failing and our leader is right in there with us and they're talking to their leaders about what we need to be successful, it becomes a feeling of safety to talk
Yeah.
about our
Yeah.
failures.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of an interesting, what happens is you start to succeed more often.
Yeah.
You're actually
Yeah.
better individually and collectively because
Yeah.
you're going higher up the mountain, because you're not doing things the same old way. You're actually learning. You're learning lessons from your challenges. You're figuring out what's working, and you are freeing up time and space to try some things. Right now,
Hmm.
people don't have a lot of time and space to try things because they're bogged down in these unproductive meetings all day long, triple booked. People are
Hmm.
triple booked.
It's
That's
crazy.
not a strategy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And those meetings, if they go ahead 6 months and look back, the ball didn't even move down the field.
Yeah. They're
So they're
confusing
having these
productivity
meetings.
with busy.
Yep.
Yeah. Like,
Yep.
yeah, be
So
busy, but not productive.
imagine 6 months of really getting accustomed to talking about our successes, talking about our failures, talking about what's
Yeah.
working, talking about what's not working. Pretty soon, failure, trying, whatever you call it, starts to
Yeah.
feel neutral.
Yeah.
That feels safe.
How do you, and this is a big question for sales. I'm going to tell you, I've seen salespeople, a lot of them are afraid of dialogue, the exchange between, and I'm taking this like out of the leadership piece. I'm going to get back to that because there's a fear of dialogue externally and internally, right? So there's a fear of dialogue when you talk about cross-functional team, because that was one of the pieces we were going to get into, is like cross-functional team. So yeah, customer success may not report into me, marketing may not report into me, their leaders may be my peers, right? And so there's this fear or apprehension to have honest dialogue internally with what's working, what's not working. It's, hey, marketing, this is what we need. Here's the ball, and I walk away. Same thing with a customer engagement. It's the salespeople are telling the customer our product or service can do this, it can do that, it can do this, but we never take a moment to understand, hey, customer prospect, how do you do things in your work? What works? What, you know what I mean? Like we don't take the time to go through that exchange of meaning between another human.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like it's a big, big problem throughout this ecosystem, the fear of dialogue. It's like we're afraid of what we're going to hear.
Mm-hmm. And some of that does need to be start at the first step, because you don't want to go all the way over and start talking to people that you haven't been talking to and start having real conversations. It won't go well and it'll die on the vine. You'll go
Yeah,
back to your old
yeah.
habits. But this is why it's so important for it to start at the top.
Mm,
So if I am, let's say I'm the leader of my team and I'm going to take this on and I'm going to start talking cross functionally and I'm going to
mm,
start having real dialogue.
yep.
But kind of like multiple siblings in a family, when one of us, let's say the customer person, doesn't have to and isn't going to, and they keep getting incentives for doing things the way they are, I now stick out, and that doesn't feel safe. And I also have
Mm,
lost any incentive
yeah,
to
yeah.
what's the point? I can
Hmm.
have some success with my team over here, but I'm a part of a bigger pool, which is
Hmm.
why it has to start at the top and it needs to happen there first.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
what I love is the companies that are working this out. They have, let's say it's a product that they offer, and the sales team sells the product, but then an implementation team comes in and helps the company that bought it make it work for them, stand it
Mm,
up.
mm,
There was a time, or there are certain companies that they have such a silo, such a wall between sales and implementation that
mm.
they drive each other crazy all day long.
Yes, yes.
Well, I know companies that have worked that out because they
Yeah.
started telling the right story.
Mm,
They stopped incentivizing salespeople for just get it done, get it done, get it done.
yes,
No, it's
yes.
more, well, don't just sell it if they're not going to be able to implement. Don't sell it if they don't really want it. We're
Yeah,
not going to give you the kind of incentives that you've been looking for if once you quote unquote throw it over the wall and it
yeah,
doesn't ever happen, we're going to
yeah,
know because they're so motivated to know the real story and to tell the same story. So they're
yeah.
looking at data from last year and the year before. They have a shared view of the data.
Hmm.
What story are your metrics telling? If it's only sales, well, did it change for them? Are they still using it?
Yeah.
And so when implementation, let's say the implementation team feels like they're at the table and sales partners with them, it is really fun. Everybody feels like a professional.
Yeah.
People are incentivized to do their part instead of thinking, well, I guess the only way to get attention in this company is I'm going to have to go into the sales organization. I'm going to have to do sales. I don't want
Yeah.
to. I could probably be good at it, but I'm so good at implementation and this is what I'm passionate about.
Hmm.
When they're partners, and they're partners because up here they're partners.
Yeah.
And then they practice. So it doesn't start out day one, but eventually you look back and you start to notice that it's normal
Hmm.
to have cross-functional conversations, to have cross-functional meetings, to have cross-functional in-services and visits to the client or the potential client. You just started doing naturally what you would do at home. At home, we break down silos. We know that silos don't work. That's the
Hmm.
same way at work. And so, again, when you start with by putting the foundation in place, and get some practice and do the best practices, but then really practice, you do start to change things. And then you have to look at how are we reinforcing silos or alignment? How
Yeah.
are we reinforcing not talking or
Hmm.
talking? How are we
Yeah.
reinforcing function, 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 or highly cross functional?
Gotcha. I want to get a little more clarity because I'm always interested in the topteamaccelerator.com, that assessment. It sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, it's almost like a cultural assessment, like a macro view, high level cultural assessment. Is that kind of what it is, or?
It is much more, it tells the story of the culture, but your team's culture. It
Mhm.
is the day to day working
Mhm.
function of your team. So
Okay.
there are 15 statements that hit all of those areas that I just talked about that
Okay.
give you the start to treat each other like people, to
Mhm.
understand where you each fit into the broader goals, to have
Mhm.
clarity about what is needed, to have
Mhm.
alignment on how it's going, and to be
Mhm.
able to hold each other accountable. Those pieces are all in there. So the statements are always, sometimes, rarely. If these things are not in place for you,
Yeah.
then you don't have a high performing team. It's not cohesive. And what
Mhm.
I can say is if that's the case, you have some big issues going on in your company, like some big culture issues, like challenges with diversity and inclusion, which everybody
Mhm.
should be hitting that out of the park, challenges
Mhm.
with supply chain. You don't really know what's going on with your customer because
Mhm.
your teams aren't telling the same story and they're not
Yeah.
connected. You can't get to that. You can't
Yeah.
get to those big wins that I talk about if your teams aren't functioning as cohesive, high performing. And this will tell you that story. And then rather than having to work on culture or work on communication, you put these building blocks in place
Yeah.
and you will start to see, first of all, some things develop naturally, but also you have freed up time and space so you can look specifically at culture and say, where do we want it to be? Let's say two
Right.
years from now.
Yeah.
What areas are working and what areas are not working, and what do we want to go after? And you've just, it's kind of the equivalent of being an athlete and you've developed a whole bunch of different skills
Mhm.
and muscles and strengths, not just one. You don't just do one teeny weeny little thing good, because if that's all you did and you're in a team sport, that won't be enough for you. So
Yeah.
once you put these different pieces in place and free up time and space, now you can go after bigger rocks that you
Mhm.
have just been pushing back down under the carpet
Yeah.
or fighting fires over and over again. And
Yeah.
so you can take on more opportunities, you can reduce expenses, you can increase revenue, you can stop that revolving door of highly experienced, high performers, the
Yeah.
talent that's going out the door, and the talent that's staying are the ones that don't feel like they have choices and you're kind of stuck with them. Once you
Yeah.
start to fit the what this assessment is getting at, you now have opportunities for greater things all around across the company.
Right. Right. So if I'm a leader, let's say I'm a senior leader, and I take the assessment, is it going to give me pretty conclusive, or is it, will I need you to interpret what it's saying, or is it like, hey, these are some red flags, these are some problems, you know what I mean? Like, will I know
It's really
based on the?
clear. It's
Okay.
really
Okay.
clear, but it tells a story of where you want to be if you want to
Mm,
be cohesive and have high performance. So it's
okay.
kind of like, if you knew this, a really good test teaches
Yeah.
people things when they're taking
Yes.
the test. It's
Yeah.
not just measuring what you already know, they're actually imparting some information. At the
Mm,
bottom, after you do the statements for each of them, then depending upon where you're at, it gives you some things you can do right today.
yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there are very specific strategies, tactics that you can go after right today, and they're right on that document. Then there's a button to go over to my website, and you'll see a bunch of resources for why do you keep saying meetings should be better? Well, because they should, and the
Yeah.
reason they're not is the same reason why you have culture issues and you have silos. Once you start to put those things in place, then you can start to take advantage of the art and science of the things we've been talking about, which the information's been out there for decades, but you couldn't help your organization change because you have
Hmm.
other things in the way. So let's get
Yeah.
at some of those things, and then you can get at the bigger pieces. So, and then it is helpful to bring a consultant in. And when a consultant comes in, you want the kind of coach who's going to be open and honest with you, meet you
Yeah.
where you are, deal with your, practically speaking, here we can go from here to here. I have a coaching roadmap, and we just meet you where you are and put in those processes in a logical order so that you can feel okay about where you're at today and be on a path to get to farther down the journey tomorrow.
Yeah. Awesome. No, if I, yeah, you would be someone I would want like a part of my team for like ever because it's so needed. And I would say any like VP, CRO, we have a lot of those personas that listen to the podcast. Go to topteamaccelerator.com, take this assessment. I just think it would be so worth it because you have to locate yourself before you can progress and change and move anywhere toward that the goal that you desire. So what closing thoughts, Margie, would you want to leave with anyone who is struggling with leadership or even trying to just figure out, hey, am I a good leader? Should I be in leadership? Or even companies that want to hire better leaders? Like what are some of the things they can do practically that can improve
Well,
that?
it's not personal. It can feel personal because it is you showing up and leading.
Yeah.
But we don't expect someone who learned how to be a lawyer to also do 9 other things. We
Mhm.
we we didn't expect them to show up unless they really went to law school and have some
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
We do not expect our accountants to know things if they weren't educated and they don't have experience. And we look at our leaders and we say, "You got this." It's every person for him or herself. And so it's not personal. We want to take it away from the personal and turn it into the concrete. There are some
Mm.
concrete things you can do to improve your leadership behaviors and skills. Now, that's not you, your soul. That is things that the way you talk, the way you do things, and it can be built upon. And the way that I coach is observing meetings and doing a lot of interaction in the
Mhm.
real world. We don't go off and do case studies. We do everything in the real world. So you get to the point where you're starting to develop habits because we're coaching in real time. We're doing everything in real time. And
Yeah.
when you don't do that, when you were expected to hire a coach over here and have private conversations or have a training or go do one ropes course as a group and now you're supposed to gel as a team, if that was how someone thought it would happen, you can be forgiven for not knowing. It's not
Yeah.
you. And so we will work with you that meets you where you are, but we know what you need to do to go from here to there. And it's not because you haven't been doing the right things or you're not a good person. It's because you didn't have that strategy the way
Yeah.
someone has a strategy for learning HVAC. We're going to teach you what you need to know, not everything, the short list so that you can succeed.
Absolutely. Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you again, Margie, for all of the knowledge and wisdom and expertise that you've shared. And I'm going to commit to you that I'm going to continue to distribute this content, distribute this message multiple times a day because it is a message that has to be heard. Things have to change. We can't fall victim and settle for the status quo. So all of Margie's contact information will be in the show notes through all the promotion that I'm going to be sending. And I want to thank everyone out there. Thank you for tuning in to help us take one step toward being the number one revenue enablement podcast in the world. We're committed to simplifying and accelerating the pace of the complex sales process. But remember, you cannot effectively optimize any function within revenue enablement without taking into account the process, the tech, and most of all, the people. So take a moment to like and subscribe so that you can receive alerts on future episodes. Follow us on all of our other social platforms for transformative insights and tactics that will give you the leverage to win more deals and maximize revenue while doing it at the same time. Take care.